Hello there, my name is Patrick Denny and welcome to this video presentation, Colchester Voices, More Memories from the Oral Archives. And the archives that I'm talking about are those which have been collected by the Colchester Recorded Oral History Group over the last 30 or more years. And in particular, in this talk, I'm going to be delving into the early part of the archive, interviews that were recorded, in the early 1990s. And this would have been at a time when the people that we interviewed were themselves anything from 80 years of age up to about 100. Now, of course, sadly, they've all passed away now. But had they been alive, they would have been anything from upwards of 110 up to about 130 years of age. So I hope you enjoy the selection of interviews that I've chosen for you, and also the illustrations which I'm going to be using to illustrate some of those events. So without further ado, let me see if I can get things ready and we'll be able to move on to my first slide. So here we are, we're looking at Colchester High Street. This is Colchester High Street looking up towards the town hall, which still stands majestically in the middle of the street there, but this picture was probably taken sometime later in 1902. Not long after the town hall was built. It opened in May 1902. And you'll notice, there would have been very, very few cars at that time. The trams hadn't arrived, so there's no trams, and it's mainly horse-drawn traffic. But what I'd like to do at this point, I'd like to try and brighten things up a little bit, if I may, by perhaps adding a bit of colour to some of these images. Now, I know the argument could be, well, these pictures were taken in black and white, we should leave them in black and white. But the people who lived at this time, they didn't see things in black and white. They saw things in colour exactly the same as we do. And it would be like watching, when you watch one of your favourite programmes like Downton Abbey, for example, a period drama, we much prefer to see it in colour. So I hope you agree. I'm going to start by this one, adding a bit of colour to this particular image here. And I hope you agree that it does indeed brighten things up a bit. Now, the town hall, you can see that, to the Edwardians, this must have been a dramatic building, dominating the high street in red brick, white Portland stone. And if you look along on the right-hand side here, roughly around here, this is where the Hippodrome Theatre and the Lamb Inn eventually came to be. But we're going to start off by listening to the memories of one lady who could remember the town hall being built and also the Hippodrome being built as well. And this lady is Olive Manning. Now, Olive was born in 1889, and I interviewed Olive in January 1990. I didn't realise it at the time, but a few months earlier, Andrew Phillips had also interviewed Olive. And I didn't know that, and Olive never mentioned it. So Olive was actually interviewed twice by Colchester Recorded. On the right-hand side, you can see a lovely picture of the town hall under construction with all the scaffolding up. And let's have a read-through of what Olive could remember. She said, "I'm 100 years old, and Queen Victoria was still on the throne when I was born. She was the best queen we ever had. I watched the town hall being built, and I knew the previous town hall and the fire station, which was next door in Stockwell Street. I was about 12 when the town hall was opened by the Earl of Rosebery. I remember going to walk in and a man saying to me, 'You can't come in here. We don't allow children to come in.' But when I said that my father was on duty there and gave him his name, he let me pass. And so I went in, and he took me all over the building, right to the top, and he put me in a cell and locked me in, because they built the police station underneath. I can also remember the Hippodrome being built and all those little shops coming down and the old Lamb Hotel." Now, this is what Olive described as the Lamb Hotel. It was the Lamb Inn. And in early 1903, this building was pulled down, and this was chosen as a site for the new Grand Theatre. And the building you can see on the right-hand side, that was also pulled down. And what they did, they built a new Lamb Inn next door. So about 18 months later, after they'd pulled this down in 1905, It was finally completed. And if you look here on the left of your screen, you'll see the hippodrome, the new hippodrome and the Lamb Inn. Notice the horse carriages outside. You know, that's the way you attended these places in those days. But on the right-hand side, you can see the modern-day view of both buildings. Architecturally, they haven't really changed, have they? The hippodrome, what was the hippodrome, or the Grand Theatre, is now attic, and the Lamb Inn has changed its name to After Office Hours. I'd just like to just give you a little bit of information before we go any further. So, as I said, the hippodrome finally opened to the public on Easter Monday 1905, on the 24th of April, and they put on a play called The Walls of Jericho. But very soon after that, it was very much one of variety performances which were being put on, singers and variety performers. It was very much like, you know, vaudeville music hall, if you like. And apart from having the stars singing songs, the audience were entertained by, for example, troops of monkeys on various occasions, Siberian educated bears. And on one occasion in March 1906, even elephants were treading the boards at the hippodrome. Another interesting little item I noted in the newspaper was in June 1906, this was during a matinee performance in the afternoon, a bullock had strode up the steps right up into the gallery and, you know, marched in front of the audience. I'll read what it says. While a large audience was enjoying an excellent entertainment at the hippodrome on Whit Monday afternoon, a bullock strode into the gallery, much to the surprise of the occupants. The unauthorized intruder also seemed amazed, but casually took stock of the audience and glanced at the performance. Before anything happened in any way to upset the entertainment, however, a number of drovers appeared on the scene in the gallery and proceeded to persuade the beast to return all the way down the 40 steps that it had come up back into the high street. So look, we're going to move on, and I'd like you to, I'm going to play you some memories of a gentleman called Sidney Murrells. Now, Sidney was born in 1892, interviewed in 1990, and you'll see I've got some illustrations. On the top left, I've got a view of North Hill. Beneath that, we've got some children in horse-drawn carts, and on the right, we've got the hippodrome. And these are the things that Sidney's going to be talking about. So shall we listen in to what he has to say?
My mother put me in a pram, took me down North Hill, and I watched the Boer War wounded come up the hill in hansom cabs. Some were bandies up there, these big sandy-coloured helmets and sandy-coloured uniform. They came up there one after the other in these hansom cabs from North Station. They were bandies up, legs in the sling, arms in the sling, tied round the neck everywhere. And the people cheered them and waved the flags. And they came up here, went to the military hospital, and then they attended to them. We put them in a blue suit, you remember it, a blue suit, and a red tie and a white collar. I went to St Mary's School at the bottom of St Mary's Steps. I imagine I was about 3 or 4, I must have been.
Can you describe to me what the school was like?
Yes, that was a brick-built school right at the bottom of St Mary's Steps. And in the playground there was a big tree. Of course, that's gone. And there used to be a classroom at one end, and then there used to be a hall at the next, you know, a little longer room, and then a little gallery at the further end. And we used to have all religious stuff, you know, all Bible work, all that sort of thing. And of course, we learned ABC and all that sort of thing, and a bit of poetry. We learned a song, God Save the King was the main one, or the Queen. And then that was during the summertime. And in the summertime, at the end of the season, about August, they used to take us for an out near Copford. And down that street, you know, and where the church is, there used to be a coal merchant named Amos, and they used to cart coal about all over the town. Well, one day of the year, the church used to hire his carts and the men and take us to Copford. But he'd been carting coal about all the weekend, and they had to wash the carts out, and we had to put the best clothes on, and we had to see the carts for cleaning before we got into them. They used to take them out of Copford, then we used to have buns and tea and races and ice cream and lectures from the parson, of course, about being good and all that sort of thing. Then we used to come back and get off the cart, sing God Save the King or the Queen, whichever it was, thank them for taking us out, and that was the end of a perfect day. Hippodrome? Oh yes, I went there all right. We used to go up there on Saturday night. Threepence in the gallery, sixpence in the pit. If you took a young girl in the pit, you had to pay sixpence. Make a bit of a show. And there used to be varieties there. Jack Johnson, the boxer, he was there. Mary Lloyd was there. And several other personalities were there on the theatrical line, you know, actresses and all the rest of it. They used to sing songs and we used to join in the chorus and have quite a pleasant Saturday evening. Penny packet of Woodbines, 80 box of matches, and we were well away.
Was there many people used to go there?
Full up every Saturday night. We had a queue. They had the first show at about 6 and the other one about 8:30. About 2 hours. We had two houses, the first house and the second house, and they were always full. We were always up the gallery, of course. Threepence. I enjoyed me penny packet of Woodbines, a box of matches. We had a lovely time. Joining the chorus, all the old songs, you know. We thoroughly enjoyed it.
Just moving on, we're going to see what Joe Lawrence thought of it in a moment. Before that, on the left-hand side, you can see some of the stars that used to appear at the Hippodrome. At the top, we've got Miss Mary Lloyd. She became famous, of course, for songs such as My Old Man Said Follow the Van. Underneath that, we've got Harry Champion, Boiled Beef and Carrots, Any Old Iron, I'm Henry VIII, I Am, those sort of songs. But at the bottom, there's one of the comedians who used to come here, Little Titch. He was quite famous because he used to wear these massive great shoes almost as big as he was. But other stars such as Vesta Tilley, and also in September 1912, the comedian Charlie Chaplin also came to the Hippodrome in Colchester shortly before he immigrated to America. But let's just see what Joe had to say, what his memories were. My mum and dad would often go to the Hippodrome for an evening out. There were two houses in those days, one about 6, another about 8:30. Sometimes Dad would take me if Mother didn't want to go. I remember seeing Jack Johnson, the boxer, who used to do a bit of sparring on stage, and Daisy Dormer, who used to be a singer. We used to sit on benches up in the gods and we would join in with all the songs. We often used to buy a penny halfpenny pie at Aberdeen's pie shop in Wye Street and take it to the show with us and drop the crusts down onto the people sitting in the stalls. Now, of course, the Hippodrome wasn't the only venue that people went to at this time. There was also the Vaudeville Electric Theatre. Now, you'll see a picture of that on the bottom left. It later became known as the Empire, and it was down the bottom of Mersey Road. And it opened in November 1911. And on Saturday mornings, they used to have something called the Penny Rush for children. So children could come in for a penny and watch some shows. On the right-hand side, you can see a couple of archive photographs from the period with all the children lined up waiting to get in there on a Saturday morning. And one lady who used to go there regularly was Elsie Seaborn. And let's see what Elsie had to say. We used to go to the Vaudeville Cinema in Mersey Road, which was called the Penny Rush. It cost a penny to get in and a penny for some fruit to eat. What we didn't eat, we used to pelt and throw at each other. We used to see rats running about the place and we would shout out and get up to mischief. A brother and sister used to run the place. One day when we were there, I saw a rat and shouted out. And I remember him coming up to me and saying, "If you don't keep your little trap shut, you aren't coming in here no more." On Friday nights, they used to have this comedian who would come out on stage and call out the name of something. And if you happened to have one on you, you'd win a prize. They did it to attract customers, and he'd say something like, "Has anybody got a pocket watch or a wristwatch?" Because people didn't have a lot of watches then. Well, on this particular night, he called out, "Has anybody got a dog's license on them?" And my father had, and he won a cutlery set, which my sister has still got. Now, another big event in the Edwardian period was the coronation tea for King George V in June 1911. And it took place on the recreation ground in Colchester, Old Heath. And all the children from all the elementary schools in the town, about 6,000 of them, made their way to the recreation ground. Some went on trams, some walked. And when they got there, they all assembled. You can see a large group of them in this image here. And they were given a tea to eat. They were entertained and various games, and they had races and all sorts of things. And then they were, presented with some prizes before they left. But I just like to share with you, you might be interested to know how much food they consumed on that day. It says between them, they consumed a total of 1,200 loaves of bread, 500 pounds of butter, 14,000 rice cakes, 7,000 currant buns, 100 gallons of milk, 7,000 almond cakes, and wait for this, 1 ton of currant cake, 100 pounds of tea, and 350 pounds of sugar. As I say, most of them, when they'd eaten, they'd been entertained, they all got a special handkerchief, and most of them got a coronation mug as well. But let's just have a look at, we'll have a look at 1 or 2 examples. In this lovely picture, you can see all the children lined up on their forms. They're all sitting on forms before they start their races and what have you. And we've got another picture here showing fun and games taking place. And also, we're just going to see what Charles Herbert thought of it. Now, Charles Herbert went there. He was born in 1897. And of course, he was one of the generation, like many of them, who, when they got to about 18 years old, they were called up for the First World War, as was Charles. And he was called up, and before long, he was fighting in Arras and on the Somme. And he went on to record for us what it was like, the horrors of trench warfare. But on this particular occasion, this is what he had to say about the tea on the wreck. In 1911, we were all marched up to the recreation ground for the King George V coronation. And I've still got the silk handkerchief that I was given. There were thousands of children up there. And Sir Worthington Evans was the one who presented us the handkerchief, and also a medal and a little oblong tin of chocolate with a picture of the King and Queen on. Now, it wasn't just, these 6,000 were the bulk of the older children from the elementary schools, but there was another little event for the very young ones, the ones who were like in the babies' classes, sort of 3, 4 and 5 years old, who were considered too young to take part in the celebration at the recreation ground. So they were entertained to a special showing of some movie pictures at the Electric Theatre. Now, this Electric Theatre, which later be called the Cameo in Head Street, was opened in 1910. So this was the first Electric Theatre in Colchester. And we've got a lovely archive picture. The quality's not brilliant, but it's all we've got. But it shows all the children lined up outside, or many of them, about to go in to watch the show. And I'm going to share the memories of one individual, one gentleman, who remembered being part of that little audience. And this was Les Crick. And I say Les was one of the younger ones, and he's going to tell you what he remembered about that event.
I remember in the very early days, that was when I was very young, the King George V coronation. Of course, all the school children at that particular coronation day, or at a coronation treat, bigger boys and girls, they were entertained from this school at least, and other school too, I think, on the recreation ground, where they had a set tea there for them, and then there was different stalls round about and amusements and games for them celebrating this occasion. But the younger ones in my age group, well, of course, as I say, I was very young, we were taken to the old Electric Theatre, Headgate Theatre, and there we were given a film show of some sort. And what I can remember, we came away, when we came out, they gave you a little Union Jack and a ball to come home with. Probably had a pack of sweets as well, but that was one occasion when that we did go out.
just to add to what Les has just said, the entertainment on that day consisted of singing and a moving picture show, which included pictures of the new king and queen. And apparently during the morning, a telegram on behalf of the children was sent to the royal couple, and the king and queen replied, thanking the children for their message and hoping that they were all enjoying their day. I'd like to move on now, and I'd like to introduce you to the Wendt family from Crockleford Heath. Now, the Wendt family figure quite prominently in our archive because at least 3 of them had their memories recorded, and we're going to hear about them in a moment or two. But in the centre of the picture here, we've got George Wendt, father and mother Hannah Wendt, and they had at least 15 children, 13 of which survived, and all those 13 are pictured here. Now, apparently they lived at the time in a little 2-bedroom cottage at Crockleford, and at any one time there was at least 10 children living at home. Some may have gone off to work, but 10 living at home. Mum and dad, of course, had 1 bedroom, and that left 1 bedroom for the other 10 children. And what they did, 5 of them would sleep in 1 bed, and in each bed there'd be 3 children lying one way and 2 lying the other way. They had no running water indoors, they had no bathrooms, they had no toilet inside, and we'll hear a bit more about that later on. But George, the father, born in Great Bromley, started off his life as an agricultural labourer. He worked on the land, and sometime in probably the 1890s, maybe getting close to 1900, he left that and got a job at the gasworks in Colchester, where he was employed as a stoker. And in order to get to the gasworks, he had to walk across from the fields, from Crockleford Heath, all the way down to the Grinstead Road and then onto the Hyde. There may be people listening to this who remember those fields. They were called the 5 Fields. There was a footpath running all the way from Grinstead Road, past St Andrew's Church and right on to Parsons Heath. And of course, his income increased dramatically. When he was working on the land, he was earning about 11 shillings a week. And when he got on the gasworks, his pay went up to at least 17 shillings and very soon up to £1 a week. So he thought he was really well off, of course, which he would have been. This is a view of some of the stokers at the gasworks. And of course, these would have been taken probably about the same time that George was there. They worked really hard. It was very hard work. It was very hot work. And they worked 12-hour shifts around the clock, 7 days a week. They hardly had any holidays. His daughter Hilda, who we'll hear from in a moment, she said to me that Dad only got about 3 days holiday from work every year. And she said, all we used to do was go over the Castle Park for a picnic. Mum would pack some sandwiches and we'd go to Castle Park. And that was instead of going to the seaside or something like that. That's all we had for a holiday. We'd go to the Castle Park for a day. We'd take our food with us and perhaps buy some bottles of ginger beer. And that was that. So what I just want to show you is I've got a couple of archive photographs from within the gasworks at Colchester in the early 1900s. And in this particular shot, we've got a stoker hard at work at the gasworks, and he's raking out the old coke and burnt coal from one of the furnaces. And in this other illustration, there's 2 men here, and what they're doing here, they're drawing red hot coke from one of the retorts, which has been used up and into a special barrow, which they will wheel off. But let's go back to the Wendt family themselves. And the 3 that we're going to hear from are these 3 pictured here. We're going to start with Ernest, then Hilda, and then we're going to finish with Arthur. Now, we're not going to hear Ernest. I'm going to read what Ernest had to say, but we are going to play an extract from Hilda and Arthur. And when we get to them, I'd like you to listen to the broad local accent. It really comes across. But let's start with Ernest. Now, Ernest and Arthur spent most of their life working on the land. And Ernest in particular used to work with horses ploughing. And in this little extract, we're going to hear about what that was like. So there he is, Ernest, born 1905. We've got an illustration of ploughing with horses underneath. Let's see what he had to say. We used to plough an acre a day with a pair of horses. With a double plough, we'd do 2 acres. To keep a furrow straight, you had to keep the horses tied back, so they all kept level. They'd have tie-backs on them, so they couldn't go too far forward. To get a furrow straight, you would put a stick in the ground at the other end and one in the middle, and you just walk towards it. The horses used to know your voice. If you wanted them to go right, we used to say "Wody," and to the left, "Cubby wee." And if we want them to keep straight, we used to say "Height, height." In the hot weather, the flies used to worry the horses, so we used to put some elder round their neck and a thin bag over their back. Flies don't like elder. At harvest time, we all had to work until 8 or 9 at night. In the beginning, we never had a combine. They had to do it all by hand. We used to cut the sheaves with a binder, pulled by 3 horses. We used to cut about 15 acres a day. Some of the horses that we used weighed nearly a ton. To stop a horse from running away, you put a running line onto it. You put the plough line right through and tied it on the bit. So when you pulled the horse's head back, it couldn't run away. You can't stop a horse from running away unless you can bend the head back. So moving on to Hilda. Now, Hilda, born 1907, and I mentioned earlier the fact there was no running water or no toilets in their cottage at Crockerford. Well, we're going to hear from Hilda now how they got their water and what the arrangements were for the toilet. So let's listen to Hilda now.
There was a well between the row of houses then, and Dad had to go up and down with 2 buckets of water. We hadn't got our own well. But when we moved to Woodbine, the well was just in front of the back door. But we still had to do it like that, pull it up with the chrome. I've pulled hundreds of buckets up in my time. And that's how we got the water. And the one at Woodbine, that never ran dry. It got ever so low, and Dad used to say to Mum, "Careful with the water, dear, we're getting down." But I've never been without water. Never. Got tons now, but I don't waste it now. I just feel, I mustn't waste that. I think I'm still at Crockerford, I suppose. I don't put in my bowl no more than I want. I don't think we should waste water. Beautiful. I'd love a glass now. My brother at Roe Hedge used to come to see Mum Saturday afternoon. The first thing he said, "Mum, glass of water, please, Mum, out of your well." And he said, he used to drink it, and he said, "I never tasted water like it, never." And it was as clear as crystal, beautiful.
What about toilet?
Wooden built, and the roof, and that was tiles on the roof, like your house, and a nice door, with a latch, etc. And I think it was cement floor, I'm sure it was, and nice wooden seats. Mum used to keep the top scrubbed every time. They were lovely and clean. And a rug on the floor or mat to put your feet on so it weren't so cold. And there was a high seat for us bigger ones and Mum and Dad, etc. And then there was a little short seat for the little children so they could sit down on the seat, and a little round. They had a little bucket under theirs, I think, that weren't so big, you know, like a little pot.
Okay, we're now going to move on to Arthur Wendt. And Arthur was born in 1903. And you'll see I've got some illustrations here. At the top, I've got Harwich Road. I've got a tram coming over East Bridge. At the bottom, we've got East Hill, Joslins, and the market. One of the things that Arthur did working on the land, particularly on market day, he had to drive bullocks to the market. And I asked him how he did that, and he gave this following account. So let's listen into what he had to say.
Yeah, so you're telling me about driving cattle to
Yes,
the market?
I used to be annoyed sometimes when I was going up East Hill, because there was trams in the middle of the road then. That time of day, and if a bullock or one of the animals got in front of the tram, he'd keep ringing his bell and he'd call out, "Come on, mate, get away." Well, how could I when he was going as fast as he could, ringing the bell, and that was running away from me. I say, "You want to stop then?"
This is the old tram driver?
Yes. And so he keep ringing his bell to get it off the track. But that wouldn't, it just keep running down the middle there, and he used to call out to you, "Come on, mate," but he didn't know what that was like. I'd got some more. And they used to be very annoying.
Now what about market day? How did you?
Yes, we used to take. Yes, we had to drive them to the market.
You did drive them there.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yes, to drive. He used to. Well, when we'd got fat bullocks, you see, they had to be drove to the market. Well, we used to shut all the gates round the farm there, and let them out, so they could have a good run round time we were having breakfast. So they got a bit timed down. Otherwise, as soon as I was out the yard, of course, why? Got the tails up and we used to drive them to market, and perhaps somebody from the farm would help us out the lanes with them. Then when you got on the top road, why you go on your own? But once we got where there was people about, there was a lot of boys. I wanted to come with us, and all I wanted to do was hit them. I said, "No, you don't. You keep back here."
How many of you would drive the bullocks? Just the two
One,
of you?
one of us.
On your own?
Yes, on your own. You've got to get on with it.
How many bullocks would you have to take on your own?
Well, you might take. It all depends. You might take 4 or 5 or half a dozen.
Can you remember the route you used to take?
Yeah, yes, you go right along here, along Harwich Road, up East Hill, down Martinborough Street, and then Peter Street. And once I got out of Peter Street, I thought, thank God I'm there. The market was down there, you see.
Did you ever have any problems?
Well, not a big problem, really, but I well remember one bullock I was driving one Saturday. I was always looking for a gate open or something to go through. That was just bad. And I was going along the Harwich Road here, halfway along, when you get by the Flying Fox, you know, halfway along there. And there was a gate open to one of them houses, and through that went. Well, what could I do? I found some boys there. I said, "Look after them bullocks, boy." And while I went after it, and this chap who lived there in the house, apparently, he'd got lovely little pylons round his garden. I knocked them all over and run all over his garden. He came out and grumbled at me. I said, "Look, no good grumbling to me. You want to keep your gate shut." Well, what could I do? And that same bullock, when I got down Maidenborough Street, there used to be Jocelyn's Ironmongers there. Don't you remember, do you? And on the right-hand side was their warehouses. There was a door open, through it went. I went after it, and as I was tossing the head, and there was boxes of stuff flying everywhere. Knocking them down. I come and grumbled. I said, "No good grumbling to me. You want to keep the door shut. You know, cattle come down here." And I come out the other door, and while that went, and when I got that into the market, I went, thank God.
That was a marvellous local accent, wasn't it, that Arthur had there?
Yeah, so you're telling me about...
Okay, one final little episode that Arthur told me, which involves both the brothers, Ernie as well, was when they purchased some violins. Let's see what he had to say. When I was about 17, I said to my brother Ernie, "I'm going uptown tonight to buy a violin." So Ernie said he would as well. So we went to a man's music shop in the high street, and I selected one that cost £2, and Ernie's one was £1.10. So we brought them with their cases and bows and brought them home. We hadn't told Dad that we were going to buy them, and he said to us, "What are you going to do with them?" We said, "Play them, of course." And Dad said, "You never will." Well, we were so determined to learn to play our violins that every night we would get upstairs to practice. You couldn't do it downstairs. Learning a violin is like a cat on the tiles. We learned to play on what you call a 2-flat tune, and then we went on to an E and a B. Dad could hear us playing upstairs, and one day he said, "Bring them downstairs and I'll play with you." Dad had a brass instrument, so we played together. And Uncle, who was also the Sunday school superintendent, told us to bring our violins to Sunday school and play them. And we're both still playing our violins at chapel over 70 years later. So let's move on. And I'm showing you now another lovely image of Colchester High Street from opposite the fire office, which you can see on the left-hand side. A lovely tram in the middle of the road. This may well have been taken not long after the tramway opened in 1904. There's still quite a few horse carts and carriages you can see around. And on the right-hand footpath, crowded with throngs of people going about their shopping and business. What I'd like to do is just to zoom in on this sort of footpath here opposite the fire office with another photograph taken at a slightly earlier time. This one here, this was actually taken in 1898. But I mean, what I like about this photograph, nobody is aware their photographs being taken. So, you know, they're just going about their everyday business, which is quite nice. There's people you can see standing and walking in the road. Over here, we've got a hackney carriage, a horse-drawn big wagon here, lots of little horse and traps. We've got a couple here. And what happened, people would often come in to Colchester, especially at weekend, in their horse and carts or even on horseback. And of course, what they wanted was someone to look after their horse for them while they left it unattended. And there used to be young boys and porters who would hang around here to do that job. And one such person who remembered being involved in that was a man called Jack Ashton. And we're going to hear a bit more from Jack in a moment. But Jack was when he was a young lad, he told me on Saturday mornings, he used to stand on the footpath here. And he said, when all these traps and horses would come in, and then people wanted to do shopping or perhaps go to the bank, he used to ask if he could hold the horse for them. And he said, I used to earn quite a few pence on a Saturday morning doing that job. But what we're going to hear about from Jack now is about his memories of more horse-drawn traffic, and in particular, what his father used to do for a living. And on the left-hand side, we've got Jack here standing in the porch of his home in Margaret Road, Colchester, which is down by the fire station. I first interviewed Jack in June 1992, but I interviewed him about a dozen times in all. We did hours and hours of interviews with him. He spent most of his working life as on the railway, working his way up to become a driver. But that's another story for another time. But let's listen into Jack talking about his father and what he did for a living.
After that job finished, he went for one of the only cab and funeral suppliers in Colchester, named Mr. Siggers, in Sir Isaac's Walk. He used to own all the vehicles, such as the open brakes, the cabs, and the Shalabier. Do you know what a Shalabier is?
No.
You don't? I'll tell you then. A Shalabier was that glass hearse drawn by two horses, which they now call the hearse, you see. And that was called the Shalabier.
And they were all horse-drawn?
All horse-drawn. All horse-drawn.
And what did your father do then? What was his
My
job?
father was a cabbie, you see. He used to drive all of them. He either used to be in the summertime taking the people down to Walton or collecting these open brakes, old about 30, or else he'd be on the funerals, you see, because only all the undertakers had to go to Mr. Siggers for the Shalabier and the cabs. And you see, cabs were very scarce, although they were a means of transport in the town. But of course, you see, going back to the horse-drawn vehicles, when the Siggers used to get a booking for an outing or something in their brakes, which held about 30 or 20 according to the size of party, there used to be a little seat on the back called the brake boy's seat, which used to help with the brake going down the hill, you see. I used to get the job of that sometimes, to sit in that little seat.
Did you really?
Yes, that's right.
So tell me how you would go about doing that if you were going, what, North Hill or?
Yes, that's right, any steep hill.
So what would you do then?
Well, they got a handbrake, the rod went down to the brakes, you see. Because the leverage on his handbrake wasn't quite enough, you see, for the weight you'd got in. And this little seat was fixed on the back for that purpose. I can always remember, it used to be a regular turnout. The man used to organise the party, used to go to Newton Green. You know Newton Green, just out here? There's a pub there with a pond against. There used to be a pond outside. And the pubs opened all day then. They didn't go there for the golf and like they go there today. They went there for the booze up, you see, and the meal. And used to take a brake load out there, you see, occasionally, and all like that.
What, your father would drive?
My father was on that, yes, yes.
So you're talking about what, 30 people on a brake?
Yes.
How many horses?
2.
how did they pull them two horses pull them up the hill?
Now, I'm glad you asked that question, because that was laughable to me. Now, Sandy Hill, coming from Newton Green, that's just outside of Colchester here somewhere, from Sudbury. Sandy Hill. That used to be a steep hill there, and there is now, I believe. That's all tarmacked and that. And my dad used to say, will all the men get out? And when he come up North Hill, the order was, will all the men get out and make it lighter for the horses, you see. A rare drag for them up them hills.
So they all used to get out?
Them who could.
Yeah.
Now, the other clip we're going to hear from Jack concerns this event here. This was the Cromer rail crash that occurred on the 12th of July 1913. Just after 3 o'clock in the afternoon, this terrific crash occurred at North Station, and it involved the Cromer Express, which was returning from Norfolk packed with holidaymakers on a through run to Liverpool Street. And just as it passed through Colchester Station, it crashed into this light engine which was on the track. Apparently this light engine had been brought onto the track to take in water, and having done that, it was waiting for the signalman to let him go back into the goods yard. Well, to cut a long story short, the signalman had forgotten he was there. And what happened, the driver sent his fireman running to the signal box to see what was going on. And while his fireman was away, the driver had noticed the signals change at the end of the line. So he knew something was coming onto the track. So in desperation, he started getting steam up and actually got it moving a few miles per hour, but it was too late. And the Cromer Express crashed into this train. The small light engine was shunted along the track about 150 yards, but miraculously didn't come off the track. But the Cromer Express, as you can see in this illustration, completely toppled over. The big restaurant car behind was completely smashed to pieces, and 3 people were killed. You can see them here, the fireman, the driver, and the guard. But Jack Ashton was probably one of the first people down there before most of the rescue people even. And let's listen to Jack's story about how he came to go down there and see what had happened.
I was living in Wellington Street, and just up the top is Chapel Street. That's where the NFS is now. There used to be some houses there. And there used to be Jim Parker, a corporal of St John's Ambulance, lived there. I walked up Wellington Street, and a telegram boy on their little red bike, so it used to be a telegram boy, he said, Mr Parker? I said, yeah, I live round the corner. He said, been an accident down the station, a railway accident. I said, has there? He said, yes. And I reckon I was down there nearly as soon as Jim Parker was getting ready, because he was a big man, and I was only a youngster, you see. And I passed a wheelbarrow stretcher, I believe I told you, with St John's ambulance man from the station, and I found it out. I went on the railway. It was George Baker, wheeling, mind you, this here stretcher on the big wheels which they kept at the station, with either the driver or the fireman on there who was killed. He'd wheeled that from North Station. He was wheeling it to the hospital. But
whereabouts did you pass him?
I passed him at the top of North Hill.
Pushed that up the hill.
He'd pushed that up that hill. And believe it or not, I could, and I found out afterwards, you see, that was either the driver or the fireman. And I got down at the station, and I thought myself, well, I don't know, being a youngster, they didn't take a lot of notes of me. So I walked along there, and of course they were stopping people going on the line, all trains were stopped. I blocked the line up. I stood right near the restaurant cars, what toppled over, and I got a fan out one of them, and I had that for a long while. Yes, and of course the engine had toppled over, and that's how the driver and fireman got killed. Now I found out afterwards when I got to work, when I started on the railway, that there was an inspector on that locomotive, but he could see the danger. He went right to the back of the tender, and he escaped getting killed. But you see, on the Sunday, when I got home, I hung about down there till tea time. When I got home, I said to my dad, I said, been an accident down the railway? He said, yes, so I heard. He said, that was a friend of his who was a signalman. Ted Kerry was the signalman. He said, my word alive. Sunday morning, we went up Burgolt Road. You know where Barsley's, the ladder shop is? fields on left foot as you go down to Woods's. There was an open field there with a footpath, go over the railway line for a stile and come out at the sheeping. Well, we went down that field and we got within, against the railway fence, within about 12 foot. Mind you, they cleared a lot of the debris away by then. They got the two big cranes, which I found out was the big Stratford crane and the one from Doncaster to upright the vehicles, you see. So I had another view of it as a Sunday.
Were there many people there on the Sunday?
Oh, gracious. Hundreds, of course there was hundreds, because, that was...
The final subject which I'd like to share with you is about the Great Colchester Pageant, which took place between June 21st and 26th in 1909. The Edwardians were very into their historical pageants, and something like pageant mania was sort of spreading around, and lots of towns were having them. In 1905, there's been a big one at Sherborne. In 06, there was one at Warwick. 07, Bury St Edmunds. 08, Dover, and Colchester planned to have one in 09. And it made it a bit easier for Colchester securing the services of this man. He was recognised as the pageant master. He's the one who put on all these successful pageants at other places, Louis Napoleon Parker. And one of the councillors from Colchester, Councillor Arthur Jarman, had attended the pageant at Warwick in 1906. He was really impressed. And he came back to Colchester and persuaded his fellow councillors and those that were running the town at the time that let's do one ourselves. So they all agreed. And in 1907, committees were drawn up. They got the services of Louis Parker to help them put it all on. And it eventually took about 2 years to plan and organise. All the scripts had to be written, costumes had to be made, all the props had to be got ready. What they were basically doing, they were planning to reenact the town's history from the time of the Iron Age right through to the Civil War. And it was all divided into 6 main episodes, and the whole thing would run back to back. There wouldn't actually be any intervals, and it would last for about 3 hours. They did have lots of dancing in between the various episodes. But anyway, the pageant called for about 3,000 performers. Now, one of the things that Louis Parker had stressed, that he wanted this to, be right across the social spectrum. Everyone can play a part. And of these 3,000 performers, hundreds of them were children from the local schools, all the elementary schools, the grammar schools, etc., etc. And also of those 3,000 performers, about 10%, about 300, had speaking parts. So we're going to have a listen in now, or we'll read some experiences of those who took part in the pageant. We're going to start off with a lovely picture taken at the time of children from the Blue Coat Central School in their pageant costumes. And on the right-hand side, we've got Jack Clark, age 14, and he's dressed as a rigadoon. If you look on the picture, you'll see there's 3 rigadoons. They've got this hat with these little bells on at the end. One there, there's one there, and there's another one here. I'm not sure whether Jack is in this particular group because there was more children involved in it. But the rigadoon was a big dance, and altogether about 200 or more children took part in this rigadoon dance, which took part in episode 5. And one lady who was also a rigadoon, who I had the pleasure of speaking to, was Dorothy Lawrence. And Dorothy attended Canterbury Road School. And let's see what Dorothy had to say. I took part in the Colchester pageant in 1909. I was in the rigadoon dance, and my partner was a boy named Wellham. I can remember us twirling around, and there were hundreds of people there every day. I wore a 2-coloured dress and had my photo taken. There were lots of marquees with photographs and refreshments. We could just go in at any time and have what we wanted. I don't remember how I was chosen to take part in the pageant, but I do remember my father taking me somewhere for rehearsals. My costume was terracotta and orange in colour and was all in points with a bell on the end. I also wore odd shoes and socks, one of one colour and one another. I have only happy memories of the pageant. Another lady who had memories was Elsie Bonner. Elsie attended Kendall Rose Girls' School, and this is what she had to say. I was chosen from our school to play a part in the pageant in 1909. I can't remember if any of the other children were chosen as well, but I'm sure they must have been, as we had to attend regular rehearsals. I took part in what was called the Triumph of Claudius, and I can remember marching in and then standing and forming a guard of honour for someone. There were crowds of people there who mostly sat up on the hill overlooking the arena. It lasted for a week, but on the Wednesday I twisted my ankle, so unfortunately couldn't do any more. You'll note that she said that there was crowds of people mostly standing up on the hill. Well, there was a massive great grandstand which seated 5,000, which had been acquired from the previous pageant at Dover, by the way. So there was 5,000 there, and yes, 5,000 or 6,000 standing up. By the end of the week, it had been estimated that about 60,000 people had attended the pageant, and many came from all over the country, with the rail companies putting on special cheap tickets to get them here. Another young lad who took part in the pageant was Frank Crick. Frank Crick attended Old Heath School, and Frank was born in 1898. And his memories were related to me in September 1988. I never got to record Frank because he was living in Canada at the time, and you can see his photograph taken in, which I'll come on to in a moment. But this is what Frank had to say. I remember taking part in the Colchester pageant in 1909, and I was what they called a camely boy. I had to march in behind the oxen, and I remember that it was very muddy and messy most days, and on one occasion my sandals got completely ruined and I had to get a new pair. By the way, I still have the costume that I wore in the pageant, although as you'll be aware it doesn't fit me now. Yes, Frank had to march in behind the sacrificial white oxen, and that would have been followed by the Emperor Claudius in his chariot. Frank was one of 10 children from Old Heath School who had a part in the pageant. And interestingly, one of the other young lads who played the part of a rigadoon, was a young boy called Handy Fisher. And as many will know, Handy Fisher later became Mayor of Colchester during the early part of the Second World War. But there's a picture of Frank on the right-hand side. This was taken in the 1980s at his home in Canada. And although I never got to interview him, I did send him some blank tapes at the time, asking if he'd put his life story on them for me. But he sadly died before he got round to doing it. But we did communicate, by letter. But there's an interesting postscript to Frank's story, because when Frank was 15, in 1914, Frank said goodbye to his parents in Old Heath, Colchester, and his brothers and all his friends and his aunts and uncles. And he travelled up to Liverpool and got on the steamer, the Empress of Ireland, bound for Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that was quite a long trip. It took about a week to get there. And when he got there, he then embarked on another trip, another 3,000-mile trip, taking about 5 days over to the western prairies of Saskatchewan. And when he got there, he got to a place called Morse, where he was met by his elder brother, Alf, who had previously gone over to Canada in 1906, when they were opening up the prairies and offering free land for those who wanted to become farmers. So anyway, when Alf met Frank at Morse, he then had another 50-mile drive in a little horse and buggy to get to his farm, which was in a little place called Bateman Gravelberg in southern Saskatchewan, about 75 miles from the US border. But this was pure, virgin prairie land they were digging up at the time. But Frank worked as a hired hand for Alfie's brother for about 5 or 6 years. And then in 1920, Frank joined the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Force. So he became a Mountie. And for most of the 1920s, Frank went around on horseback all over the province, visiting the native camps. He spent time up in Churchill near Hudson Bay. He tells of exploits of, dodging and fighting off polar bears. It was quite an exciting life. And I've got a couple of views here. On the left-hand side, there's Frank visiting a native reserve in the 1920s, and another one of him on horseback in Humboldt, Saskatchewan. Now, Frank, at the end of the 20s, Frank left the Mounties because he wanted to get married. And apparently the rule was that you had to be in there for 12 years before you could get married, but he didn't want to wait for 12 years. So he left the Mounties, but he didn't leave being a policeman. He then joined the Canadian Pacific Railway Police, where he stayed for the rest of his working life until he retired. And at the time of his retirement in the 1960s, his total police work, from being in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian Pacific Railway Police, was over 40 years. And at the time, he was the second longest serving policeman on record in Canada. But he was also interviewed several times. And here we've got in 1988, this would have been just a few months before he died, he was recalling to a reporter his early days in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Force. So not bad for a young lad from Old Heath who took part in the Colchester pageant. Here we've got some lovely views of the pageant. On the top left, we've got the Temple of Claudius, which was partly erected in front of the audience and then destroyed as well, partly. On the extreme left-hand side, look, if you see right over here, there's the oxen. There's the white oxen that Frank had to walk in behind. On the top right, we've got the Temple of Claudius again. And here we've got Queen Boudica in her chariot. She's wearing a brass helmet, spiked helmet, and a brass breastplate. Come to that in a moment. Bottom left, very rare, unusual photograph of some performers who are peering in from behind the grandstand at the performance which is actually taking place. And on the bottom right, this is part of the final march past at the end of the pageant. After the end of it lasted 3 hours. At the end of the 3-hour show, all 3,000 performers marched onto the parade, onto the pageant ground, and stood before the grandstand. But in this picture, if you look carefully, you can see they're holding up something here, and it is the St. Helena Shrine. This was made specifically for the pageant. Now, at the end of the pageant, all the props were sold off. You know, the Temple of Claudius was sold off, Boudica's chariot, all the spears and daggers and everything was sold off. And in 2010, down in Sussex, this shrine turned up. They contacted Colchester Museum and wondered whether they might be interested in it. So it was purchased with the help of the Friends of the Museums, just over £2,000 they paid for it. And here you can see it going under the conservation process in the Castle Museum. And in the centre, it's now on display in Colchester Castle. And also in the same cabinet, you've got Boudica's helmet and her breastplate. So those have also been recovered at some stage. And the final person I'd like to introduce you to, and we'll hear their memories, is somebody on this wedding photograph, which was taken in 1905. The occasion is the wedding of Mildred Bunting and Harry Ingle. Now, Mildred Bunting was the daughter of Alfred Bunting, who was the proprietor of North Nurseries. And there we can see Alfred with his wife, Drusilla. And over here, we've got one of Alfred's brothers, that's William Ellis, who was for a time responsible for the Lexton Road branch of the business. And William Ellis's son was a man called William Warlow, and many will remember that William Warlow was the one who founded the well-known Bunting Rooms in Colchester. But the person I spoke to was this young girl down the bottom here. That was Winifred Bunting. And I spoke to Winifred. I met her when she was about 92 years old. Next to Winifred here is a page boy. His name was Guy Barrett, and his parents were Ernest and Gertrude Barrett. And just a year earlier, they had been driving the first tram in Colchester when it opened up. And on the other side of Winifred, there is her elder brother, Eric Bunting, who went on to inherit the Bunting business. But what we're going to do, we're going to listen to some memories from Winifred. There's Winifred when I met her, interviewed her in April 1990, and she was telling me that she got involved in one of these big dances at the pageant, and it was called the Rose Dance. And the Rose Dance consisted of upwards of 200 or more girls from the various schools in Colchester, and we're going to hear Winifred's take on that and what she remembered about being a Rose Girl.
Now, it must have been about this time that the Colchester pageant was on in 1909. Do you remember that?
Oh, indeed I do. I was one of the smallest Rose girls, and there were rows of girls, and I was in the front row and was dressed in the palest of pink frocks. And as the rows went back, each costume was just a little bit deeper until they reached a deep rose at the biggest girls at the back. And we had ribboned ties that we had to dance, wave and dance to. And we were all put through this, what they called the rose dance. And it was a very pretty sight to see the palest pink going right up, and you see, as the colours deepened, the girls got that bit bigger.
Can you tell me a little bit about the rehearsals?
Oh yes, indeed. There was a marvellous producer. His name was Louis N. Parker, and he used to sit up on a high rostrum, and he had a great megaphone, and he used to shout at us like mad. And if you dare put a foot wrong, he'd bound to see it.
In this view of the pageant, here we've got this was a scene where the grammar school boys are being presented to Queen Elizabeth I. But it was the grammar school boys of the day who played the part of the grammar school boys. And one of those grammar school boys was indeed Eric Bunting, Winifred's older brother. And my final slide I'd like to show you is another view from this final march past, where all 3,000 performers, all in their colourful costumes, all assembled on the pageant ground to take their bow, as it were, in front of the great grandstand. In the front here, we can see this is the Emperor Claudius, and he's being attended by some of these Camely children. This is the sort of thing that Frank would have got involved in. But I'm going to finish there. I hope you've enjoyed listening to some of the interviews and looking at some of the archive photographs. But this is the end, so thank you very much.